Hey guys, it's LOL_Rybun, and today I want to talk about statues. Recently, one of you has come to me and talked to me about statues quite a lot, actually, with some interesting findings as to what the best statue combinations are. I know that I am a hard advocate for wylmir, Cedric, Ozreth for skill builds. Namely because Ozreth scales the best out of all the, oh, you're afflicted by this, take this amount of extra damage at 10% per level of the statue. Cedric gives you resistance into skill power, which is one of the best ways to attain or obtain skill power. And wylmir transforms your mana costs into base damage, which then these three things working in conjunction raise your skill power exponentially, and then raise the damage your spells deal before it gets affected by skill power exponentially. This creates very large numbers when using spells. Similarly, for a primary build, you're going to take Calis, because Calis is similar to Cedric, but turns armor into attack power, and increasing, of course, per level, just like Cedric. And Ozreth, because yet again, Ozreth scales the best. But on the last statue, I think you can really experiment a lot with the primary base builds because they don't have a really super niche third statue like wylmir. I think this is where we're going to see a lot of the development. I know I personally really like Kyra, but the problem with Kyra is that Kyra scales off of skill power. So if you take skill power based damage with stuff boosting your attack power, it's not going to be all that great. So more recently I've been trying out Phalarath more because it's just usually better, and if you do have any amount of dodge chance, you have a chance to do damage, or not a chance, you do damage to enemies when dodging, so it's really good. Anywho, the structure for this video is I've created a new priest. I've used my beautiful console cheats to power my way through NG30 to get a level 190 priest with no crit chance, and I've made a few assumptions here. First and foremost, I've done all the upgrades other than crit damage and crit chance for both skills and the blacksmith, the wizard and the blacksmith, if you will. And from that, we're going to be testing all the statues at a pretty high level, just so we can see their full effect of scaling. I think if we took the statues at level, I don't know, 5, 10, 15, it'd be something that's a lot more, you know, attainable, but realistically, we're testing the scalability of the statues and how much that affects it. So I'm going to set all my statues to level 200, and we're going to begin testing. What I will be doing is, since we have no crit chance, we'll be counting damage. We'll do 10 attacks, which should always be the same realistically, and once we fire those 10 attacks, if there are any outliers, which I don't think there will be, we'll count the damage of that attack with each and every type of statue. Now for the status afflicted ones, of course, we will be having to apply those statuses, so we will have to differentiate between our damage and the, for example, bleed or poison or fire damage. However, that is the plan, to afflict them with all the statuses. In case we are doing something based on 3 statuses, I will do my best to apply all 3 of them so that we can get a fair test on how much it affects the damage. I just want to get numbers going so that we can figure out the best combination, really, for damage. Now, of course, this kind of throws survivability in the toilet because all I'm testing for is damage. If you know, Calis has a chance to block projectiles, and there's some other survivability aspects which you could consider, like Phalarath doing damage when you evade means that you can evade and deal tons of damage, and therefore live by just evading. You know, you can theoretically beat the game by just evading, and if you have evil infusion, that adds to your survivability. There's a lot of stuff to consider besides statues themselves, but I figured the best way to compare statues is to do it looking strictly at statues. Without further ado, we'll get into the video and we'll start testing out statue combinations. One thing to note here is that we will be excluding Bolgarth, as Bolgarth's main scaling is combo time extension. With level 200 Bolgarth, your combo is extended by 100 seconds. However, the damage doesn't change at all. I don't think it's something worth testing for damage for our purposes. We already know exactly what it'll cause, and for that reason, there's no reason to check it out. We will, however, be testing Kyra, but we will be testing Kyra exclusively with Cedric, because that is, or Kyra with Cedric and Ozreth, I think, and then Kyra with another elemental effect such as burning and Ozreth, to compare which increases Kyra's damage more, and then see if a skill-based primary proccing Kyra build is viable. I've always wanted to look into this, so it's something we'll look into, but Kyra will be excluded from all the other combinations. So as far as the statues go that we will be looking at consistently with every other statue, we've got, I'm going to butcher this, Ewran? I don't know. This one gives you extra damage dealt to frozen enemies. Ozreth, which we all know and love, giving us extra damage to poisoned enemies. There are a lot of items that trigger poisons. This is just, it's just better than all of the other ones. I'm gonna be honest. For any elemental effect, it's just the best one. There's no doubt in my mind. Phalarath, which gives us extra damage to disarmed and stunned enemies. Calis, which gives us armor to attack power. 5% per level, so every 20 levels is 100%. So at level 200, that is 1,000%. So it takes your armor and makes it into attack power at a rate of 1,000% of it. Daran, which is damage dealt to burning enemies, increasing 5% every level. Like we said earlier, we're skipping over Kyra. Wylmir is interesting because Wylmir adds 5% of the skill cost as damage to your skills. And last but not least, Cedric, who is like Calis, but resistance to skill power. Now, you'll see very quickly how these all interact with each other. I'm still putting my personal bet on Cedric, Wylmir, and Ozreth for the most damage per setup, because these three in conjunction, if you do the math, just work absolutely ridiculously with each other. For sake of simplicity here, we're going to label Ewran, if you want to pronounce it like that. It's probably butchering it, but that's okay. Phalarath and Daran as 5% statues for the sake of this video, since we will be, you know, trying to make this as compressed as it can be so the video doesn't go on forever. We'll just call these 5% statues, and we'll be testing out statues in the order of, there's Calis for percent armor to attack, Cedric for percent resistance to skill power, Ozreth as a 10% statue, Wylmir for skill cost to damage to skills, and then the 5% statues. And then the edge case of Kyra that will include kind of as a extra thing that'll just be in here. So we'll get going, and we'll be testing out all these combinations. So we'll start off with, I'm not even sure what. Maybe Cedric, Calis, and Ozreth. And this is a pretty good start. And what I'll be doing for this is I'm going to give myself items according to what we need to proc the stuff. And so hopefully I'll be able to do that without increasing my damage at all. So stuff like coated arrow. I'm not too sure how we're going to do the fire and ice ones without, you know, proccing it otherwise, but we'll figure it out. Okay, so we're back. I gave myself a bunch of lucky hats for extra percent chance to proc this, and I also enhanced it. So if we hit one of these guys, we should almost always get the poison procced. And you'll see that our damage goes up from very small to very big very, very quickly with this. So we will be testing, I guess, is the damage on both the primary and the hollowed ground skill, and just see how these work. Granted, the circumstances. So I won't have anything that increases damage. Hopefully over here, I'll see what I can do for the fire and ice things. I probably will ignore them unless I really feel like I have to. But we'll be testing out quite a few combinations here. So starting off with, though, I do want to do a base test. So we'll get to that in a second. One more thing that should be mentioned before we get into this is that I do not have any class titles. I don't know why this is showing, but the only one I have is health regen. So my armor and resistance are both pretty low stats. And because of this, we're not going to see too much Calis and Cedric improvements. Naturally, if you were at the NG level that this character is at, you'd have much higher armor and resistance either through Bloodrites or through Paladin and Warlock titles. You know, by some means, you'd have more armor and resistance than this. So Calis and Cedric are kind of at an underplaying part in this video in terms of the damage they're going to be providing. But I think we'll see they're still pretty effective even when they're not providing that much because the armor and resistance are pretty low. I personally think they're really high powerhouse statues, so it'll be really interesting for me to see if they're not actually all that huge as I'm thinking them as. So anyways, this is our base plate checking. So for base plate checking, all we're going to do is we're going to hit the statue a few times and see what our damage is without any statues. As you can see, the poison's doing 3 damage, but we're hitting for 5s consistently. So our damage is 5, and our circle does 3 damage. Next, we're checking out Calis, Cedric, Ozreth. So with these, we should see a sizable increase in our spell damage and our damage, especially when the target's poisoned. So our damage looks to be 765 with the basic attack and 1089 with the spell. That's pretty good. For this next one, we swapped out Ozreth with Wylmir. So now we're rocking mana cost into spell damage. So our primary damage should have probably gone down. We're sitting at 36 now, but our skill damage should have gone way up. So 2,386, which proves that for skills, Wylmir is going to provide more damage than Ozreth in conjunction with Cedric. Now, of course, if you add Ozreth in with Cedric and Wylmir, it should be pretty high. But so far, it's showing that that should be the best, or some of the best 2 statues for skills. This one's a bit weird. We've got Calis, Ozreth, and Wylmir. So Calis plus Ozreth, we should be hitting for the same primary damage as before. We're expecting 765, which is what we've got. And then we've also got our skills with Ozreth and Wylmir, which proves to actually hit harder than Cedric and Wylmir. Now, like I said before, we don't have resistances for our Cedric to scale super hard, so this is kind of expected, but it really does show off the power of a Wylmir. So 3341, 3,341 for our skill. Yet another kind of strange combination in my head, but this one should have tons of our primary damage being boosted because we have Calis plus Ozreth plus Phalarath. Both are going to give us % damages plus the armor to attack power from Calis. We should see hefty primary damage and also potentially some pretty hefty skill damage, even though we don't have Wylmir. So we'll see how that goes. Our primary is at 1129, 1129, and our skill is hitting for 107, which is significantly less than with Wylmir. But still a lot more than our base damage of 3, so I mean, it's still an improvement for sure. I full well expect this to hit like a truck. This is the skill build I usually use, Cedric, Ozreth, and Wylmir. It gives you tons and tons of damage, and I'm pretty sure this will be the best in terms of getting our skill damage to the absolute peak here. So without further ado, let's see the damage. Primary should still be pretty low, but we still do have Ozreth, so we're hitting at a solid 111 damage, which is, I mean, it's okay. But the main event, of course, is the skill, which is hitting for 50,113 damage. 50,113. That is by far the biggest number we've seen. All right. on to the next one. Next is Cedric, Ozreth, and Phalarath. Just something I want to note here real quick. I know I didn't note it at the start. These statues that I'm picking out are just of ease of accessing these debuffs without adding extra damage in some way, shape, or form. That way we get a pure unconditional damage test without messing anything up. I'm not saying that Phalarath is the optimal thing for a mage. I think you'd get off a lot better with something like Daran or something. But 5% damage modifier is 5% damage modifier across the board. For ease of testing, Phalarath is the one I'm going to use along with Ozreth, because we can get these primary attack triggered status effects that don't add any damage other than the damage that they may or may not do over time. So that's where we're coming out here. So primary attack with this is going to be higher, of course, because we're not running Wylmir. So we're at 164. And the skill is hitting for 1608, it looks like. Yeah, I believe it's 1608. So that's where we're sitting at. This one will be interesting. So we're running Wylmir, Ozreth, and Phalarath. For what we saw before, Cedric was definitely weaker than Ozreth with our current situation of not having extra magic resist from any class titles. However, Cedric, I believe, is usually more powerful than Ozreth. But in this case, is Cedric more powerful than Phalarath? Because if it's not, we'll see an even bigger number than the 50,000 we saw before on that skill damage. Of course, this stuff is going to boost our physical damage quite a bit too. So we're sitting at 164 again. And with the addition of the consecrated ground, I believe it's called, what do we hit? 4932. Yep, 4932 for the skill. So at this point, we've tested all of the statue combinations of Cedric, Calis, and Wylmir with the likes of the 10% statue, Ozreth, and the 3-5% statues, ignoring Kyra and bolgarth. The last thing to check, of course, is the all-rounder build, where you'll rock 2 5% statues. For this, I would like to choose the burning enemies because we can put on a I think it's called Cloak of the Flamewalker. I could be wrong, but we'll put on the thing that constantly burns enemies so that they'll constantly have the burning effect. It won't change our damage, and then we'll be able to test both the physical and magical prowess of this build. I think it'll be like below average overall, but it will be boosting both your skill and your attack power, which makes you more of an all-rounder, which can be nice sometimes. Interestingly enough, because of Daran's passive, we're actually proccing bleeding quite a lot too, but this way you can get all 3 status effects. And reading through these numbers would be a bit harder, but it looks like we're hitting for 217 on our primary. I think that's a... I think it's a 142 for this skill. I'll have to hit it without the skill up and see if there's any 142s. Yeah, it's 142 for the skill. So 217 and 142. There's 2 more things I want to do in this video. First of which, I want to test the feasibility of Kyra and see what the best build to take with Kyra is. I believe it'll end up being Cedric, Ozreth, Kyra. For late game, and for earlier stages of the game, it'd probably end up being Calis, because you're going to be doing much more with your primary than with Kyra. So Calis, Kyra, Cedric maybe to boost Kyra. But I just kind of test out those 2 combinations and see how they fare in terms of damage. And then the last thing I want to do is go over the best Cedric and Calis builds and add 10 of each of their respective Bloodrites to see their damage and full potential if you did have Bloodrites or any amount of extra armor, essentially. Armor or resistance, beefing those stats up even more. So we'll hop into the Kyra stuff, and then immediately after, we'll go into the Calis and Cedric at their full potential kind of stuff. So this is kind of what I thought would happen when we pull out Kyra at a very high end game. because Kyra gets 4 base damage every single level. Level 200, we're talking 800 base damage. That's a lot. When you modify that with skill power, increasing the damage a bunch, you're gonna get pretty high damage. So Kyra, for instance, right now is hitting for 3,849, and I'm sure when we compare that to my primary attack, which appears to be 384 is a number I'm seeing consistently in there. 384 pales in comparison. And as such, really shows the power of Kyra late game. Now, of course, at Kyra level 10 or something, she's going to be hitting a lot less strongly. And because of that, and, you know, having to proc this on a 50% chance, she's going to do a lot less damage than you would with your primary, which is the reason for this build we're rocking right now, with Calis to make up for the potential damage that Kyra is lacking. Now we want to see what Kyra is like in full swing with proccing Ozreth for extra damage. So we'll check that in a second. So let me write down these numbers, and then we'll get into the next one. I actually had a really genius idea of just taking off Kyra so I could actually see the damage I was hitting with. It most certainly was not 384. I believe it's that 36 you're seeing, but we'll see if it disappears once. Yeah, we're hitting for 36. Yeah, 36. Okay, going full swing into boosting up Kyra's damage with Ozreth. Kyra's arrows are now hitting for what appears to be 80,819 damage, which is more than our skills were hitting for earlier, proving Kyra is a very versatile statue if you decide to take her into the late game. You know, starting off pretty weak, but scaling to be something that someone who wants to use their primary attack as their main source of damage can really take advantage of. The other advantage of this is all your items are going to get amped up too, because you're rocking a skill power base build, and so you can build a quote-unquote skill build that uses the primary attack as their main source of damage. Pretty nifty, if you ask me. So this portion of the video that you're about to witness is all about the quote-unquote best builds in terms of just flat damage for both primary and skill builds, and how they're going to fare up in terms of damage with the Cedrics, I should say the Cedric and Calis specific ones that did the most damage. We're going to compare their best damage, which in this case is 1,129 for the primary attack, versus what happens when we give ourselves 5 statues, or not statues, Bloodrites related to that primary stat. So I do have a mod installed for this, I believe. So if I give myself Bloodrite armor 5, you'll now see I have 5 Bloodrites to the Immortal. We'll check it out, since Calis should be significantly more powerful now. This would be a little bit bugged, I think, in its numbers. But as you can see, Calis has gotten a lot stronger, with 5,568 being our damage now. If we add in another 5, actually I could have just copied that line. Now we're at 9,813. So this is with 10 Bloodrites. Roughly the damage increase is, I would say, 9 times from those 10 Bloodrites, which means Calis has gotten significantly stronger from those Bloodrites. So as such, we're hitting very, very hard now. And let me go write this down, and we'll start testing out the best Cedric-based skill damage build. So it's no doubt you remember this build is our highest hitting build, hitting for 50,113 damage. But what happens if we amp up Cedric so it'll give us more skill power? Well, let's find out. So instead of armor, we're going to add resistance 5. And with that, we're now hitting for 203,794. Well, what happens if we add in another 5 Bloodrites of resistance? Well, now we're looking at 350,793 damage. As you can see, Cedric is very powerful. Skill builds do tend to hit very, very hard. I know I didn't technically check every single combination in the game, but I did check stuff that would have matching stat values. Like I said earlier in the video, I would like to stress that you can pick any 5% boosting damage statue that fits your build the most. Whatever you feel like is the most comfortable to you or does the most for you, whatever you like the most, take that one. Essentially, they're all going to give you the same amount of damage, but they're going to have different passives up at the top that you can pick and choose from. So that's all up to you. I only tested the 5% as quote-unquote 5% because ultimately that's all they do to damage, which is what we're testing in this video. That being said, we did test out the builds for doing the most damage, and it turns out the most optimal builds for doing damage are, for primary attacks, Calis, Ewran, and Phalarath, which can also be classified as a Calis 10% 5% build, and the best skill build for raw damage is a Cedric Wylmir and 10% build. Of course, you could ask, well, you didn't test 5% for that build. Well, that's because 5% is going to add less damage than 10% no matter what you do. So Ewran just knocks out the need to test for 5% if two of the other statues aren't percent based, which is why I tested the statue combinations that I did. Last but not least, I'm going to have a summarization chart appearing on screen here for all of the stuff if you're interested. And that's it for me. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative. I know I've always just kind of gone with the flow with what people say is the best statue. This is the first time I've actually gone out of my comfort zone and tested it. So I hope you all enjoyed this video and learned a lot with me. Anyways, yet again, hope you're all having a wonderful week. I know Thanksgiving just passed, but I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving if you do celebrate it. If not, I hope you're all having just as wonderful a day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Bye, guys. Oh, and one last thing. Thank you very much for the idea from a comment by Lucent Hunter. I know you talked to me very much in depth about statues that you had tested out. I wanted to go and test all these combinations myself because I found what you were finding very interesting, and I wanted to just look into it and experience it for myself. So thank you for the idea. I hope you found this video informative as well and enjoyed watching it and all that stuff. Anywho, yet again, bye guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.